All right, so warm up today as lots and lots of kiddos are popping in. So you can unmute or you can type in the chat. So today is International Women's Day. What does that mean to you? Girl power, Taj? Okay, Adriel, you raised your hand.
I think it means like strong woman, I guess. I don't know. It just
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, Samuel, it is also Women's
I'm not
Month.
really sure.
Can you? Okay, hang on just a second, Angeline. Kenneth, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that? I'm just trying to understand what you mean by some girls trying to control boys for today. Hi, Ryan. If you could explain that a little bit further to me, Kenneth, and you can unmute if you need to. No, nice. I have not. I'm looking at my email right now. Okay, there are some girls, but they use their day, birthday, Wednesday. Okay. No, nice. I've got nothing. I don't have anything. Okay. I'm thinking more along the lines, Kenneth. Like we know it's Women's Month, right? Or Girls Month, Women's Month. Today specifically is International Women's Day. I'm sure there are people who are like that. I mean, I would hope that that's the exception, not the norm. I personally don't know anybody who is like that, but you know.
It's mostly like kids, I guess. But
Yeah.
what I feel is like I don't consider myself a woman yet. I still consider myself a child. I'd like to perceive myself as a child for as long as I can. So I don't really know how to answer this question.
Well, I mean, the idea is, I think, because if we look back in history and we've looked at some different cultures, right? And we've seen in some cultures how women have been kind of oppressed in different cultures, just or thought less of. So the idea behind Women's Month, or specifically International Women's Day, was to think differently. I think about women, think about achievements that women have made. I think is what the idea behind it, kind of that idea. At least that's where I go, and that's really sad, Kenneth. I'm sad to hear that.
But what I don't understand is like why can't men get their own month or day even? It doesn't make sense. I've seen a whole bunch of like things where people say, "Oh yeah, women this, women that." But what about boys? What about children? What about well, there is a kids day actually, but like still, what about them?
Or they say that a man is just a walking wallet to them.
And that's really sad. Really, really sad. And that's I don't honestly, I believe that if we're going to be talking about a month or a day, we're all humans. We're all people. So why can't we just celebrate the fact that everybody's different? We're all humans in that way. And how about we just celebrate achievements? Doesn't matter who's done it, whether their gender or their race or whatever, just celebrate the actual achievements. Is my thought.
But I think like mostly. I get it, like why we have Women's Day, because women have definitely excelled from past times where we weren't allowed to vote, we had to dress a certain way. Now we can do whatever we want, but men, like, I don't understand. I think it's just
I
because they seemed to be more like controversial, I guess, because they've done things, especially like past male authority figures. So I don't
I mean,
know.
I do understand. I understand where this came about when we were looking at women getting the right to vote and moving forward. I think today it's yeah, November 19th, Ryan. You are correct. There is an International Men's Day as well. Um, I guess I wanted to know, like, what does that mean for you that there is an international day? And so I'm glad, Ryan, that you looked that up and you were able to pull that in here. It's kind of the same thing. There are groups that get entire months that other groups do not get. Sometimes it's, oh, why does this group get a month, but this group only gets a week, or this group only gets a day, or I think where we have come to at this point is in trying to right the perceived wrongs of the past. I think where we're at in 2023, I don't know, Kenneth. I putting that in all capitals, you realize, right? That's the equivalent of yelling. Okay. I don't know. I don't make up the months. I don't make up the days. I don't know why. I think the way they all began was to, you know, I think the idea was to put, you know, hey, these groups have been in the past marginalized. And so now we want to make up for it today. Okay. I think it's kind of the idea. Hey, Jamarcus, do you realize your camera is on? But yet you're not on camera. So why don't you, if you want to, why don't you go ahead and turn off the camera? Okay. I mean, they have been in the past. And in certain cultures, there are some issues with that. I think more in our developing world than in the developed world. I think is where we see more of that, right? And in fact, since we are going to begin change over time in Africa, there are nations in Africa where women aren't seen as equal, correct?
I feel like after time, these days are gonna like die out. Like, no offense, but like the Oreo Day, stuff like that, like the national holidays or whatever. Not even holidays, they're just days, but I feel like they're gonna die out and get replaced with something else. At least that's what I think.
Well, each day, when I pull up national days, each day, depending, can have anywhere from 10 to 25 items in there. So I just try and find ones that I think will either be thought-provoking or fun, like talking about Oreo cookies,
Birthday.
things like that. Ryan, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, well, but like the world today, it's just that everyone just wants to, like, there's so much fighting and everyone wants to just nuke each other.
Well, not so much nuke each other because not everybody has that. But yes, people, everything is more about confrontation rather than acceptance, I think. And no, Halloween, not really. I think it just, those are more individual and in different areas because there are different areas where Halloween is huge. And for certain groups of people, Halloween is huge. So I think we see those things as over time. Okay. Yep. National Lego Day. There's all kinds of really fun days. And that's what I try and find for you guys. But sometimes we got to have a little bit of a serious day, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like what Brandon said, it's kind of like dying out, the whole Halloween thing, at least here, because in our neighborhood a few years back, it was packed and everybody'd be running up and down the street. It's not like that anymore. I don't understand what happened.
The neighborhoods in Henderson, it is huge.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because that's what we do
So,
every year. We go up to like the higher people with more money per se, and we always go up to those houses. So I was thinking maybe they just all decided to think smarter and go up.
yeah. All right. So I just hopefully now I've got all of your little brains going, 90 to nothing. If you could, can you open up Module 8, Lesson 3, the course arc and the journal? If you would. All right, so you know, as of Monday night at midnight, everything for quarter 3 closed. I spent all day yesterday and most of this morning, like I was up before the crack of dawn, grading and entering and doing all of that. So I have been working. I have grades posted. And then I always post them so I can get them in. Everything thus far matches, because Canvas is your official grade. So now Infinite Campus matches Canvas. And then I will go back and look at it again either this afternoon or tomorrow morning when I have some fresh eyes, just to make sure there was nothing I missed. Okay. So yeah, if you guys would open up Module 8, Lesson 3, the course arc in the journal, we're going to start those today. And while you guys are, okay, Kenneth, while you guys are going to do that, I have a video about the diversity of Africa, because we've been talking about cultural diffusion.
From shipping dock to college classroom, there's a way up
Give
for
me a
anyone,
moment.
because there's something for everyone, like prepaid tuition.
Okay, so I will mute myself and then I will get the video going.
For college, GED, and ESL programs for nearly 1 million Amazon employees and delivery drivers.
If you only list your vacation home on Airbnb.
If you've grown up in really most non-African parts of the world, you've probably been, at the very least, exposed to the mindset that Africa is an entirely homogeneous continent, assuming there's much civilization there at all. Now, I'd imagine you probably know that that's not remotely true, which is a good thing because this massive continent is home to a huge variety of different cultures that I think could use some time in the spotlight. First, let's get some scale with this thing. Something we all probably already know, but that we don't really think about all that much, is just how big Africa is. Africa has a surface area of 30 million square kilometers, making it the second largest continent on Earth, behind, of course, Asia. Way larger than North America and almost twice as large as South America. Normally at this point, I suppose I compare Africa to countries, like trying to fit as many Chinas and Russias as I can, but Africa is big enough to fit all of Europe and Oceania with almost enough room to squeeze in Antarctica. In fact, Africa is 8 million square kilometers short of equaling the size of the moon. Forget Russia and their whole being bigger than Pluto thing, Africa's playing the real game here. So yeah, Africa is pretty big. So you could probably also imagine that it has a pretty diverse collection of cultures, especially with their massive population. Africa is home to a rapidly increasing population of 1.2 billion, which, although smaller than India and China, is still bigger than all of Luxembourg, Tuvalu, Brunei, Liechtenstein, and the Americas combined. Of course, probably the best way for us to tackle a subject like this would be to first divide Africa into some more bite-sized pieces. There are numerous ways to divide Africa, including poorly, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to go with the regions assigned by the African Union to better categorize its member nations: North, East, Central, West, and Southern Africa. So first we start in North Africa, and the countries of Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, and possibly also Mauritania and Sudan, depending on who you ask. Also, no comments on the whole Western Sahara thing. These nations all occupy various parts of the mighty Sahara Desert, and all have strong Arabic influences, with all of them at least partially speaking Arabic, and all but Sudan having Islam as the official state religion, in contrast to the more Christian and native religion-based regions south of the Sahel, and also hence why South Sudan wasn't fully comfortable being inside of Sudan. This region has had extensive contact with Europe and Western Asia for thousands of years, having been part of European and Middle Eastern empires before colonialism was in fashion. Most of these countries, aside from Egypt and Sudan, are also part of a region known as the Maghreb, essentially the western part of the Arab world, though they also have long histories with the native Berber or Amazigh peoples. Do check out my friend Kagita's video if you want to learn more about the Amazigh. They're actually a very interesting people group, but of course they're far from the only interesting culture in Africa. Next we head to East Africa, most likely where the human race first evolved, and now home to South Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Madagascar, and possibly also including Mozambique, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, again depending on who you ask. This region notably includes the Horn of Africa and the Great African Lakes, including Lakes Turkana, Victoria, Tanganyika, and Malawi. In the north of this region, people generally speak Afro-Asiatic languages, like Somali, Amharic, and Tigrinya, as well as a minority of those who speak their distant linguistic relative Arabic. Many in this region also speak various Nilo-Saharan languages, and Madagascar's Malagasy language is actually an Austronesian language, technically more closely related to Malay and Hawaiian. The south, however, is much more dominated by Niger-Congo Bantu languages, with by far the most prevalent, at 80 million speakers, being of course Swahili, spoken as an official language in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. This area was also dominated by the Swahili city-states, who had lucrative trading relations all across the Indian Ocean. Also, I'd definitely keep an eye on this region in the coming decades, especially with the rise of the East African Federation. Check out this video from Atlas Pro for more information on that. In Central Africa, we have Angola, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Chad, Dr. Congo, the Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, and São Tomé and Príncipe, all members of the Economic Community of Central African States, or ECOWAS, with the addition of Rwanda and Burundi. Perhaps not too surprisingly, this region is primarily home to Niger-Congo language speakers, as in between the Niger and Congo rivers. Speaking of said rivers, this region is also home to the Congo Basin, itself home to one of the largest rainforests in the world. Oh, and check out this Chad. It means lake. Let's establish some sick empires here, and also down in Congo. On to West Africa, and we see a lot of smaller nations, namely Benin, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Togo, all of which being members of the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS. This region was home to many large empires throughout history, including those of the Songhai, Ghana, Oyo, and Mali empires, the latter of which having at one point been ruled by the richest man in the world, Mansa Musa. Cause gold and salt and all that. With a population of nearly 400 million, this region is crazily diverse in terms of languages and cultures, and could honestly probably get a video in its own right, given that there are over 500 languages spoken in Nigeria alone. West Africa is also ecologically diverse, straddling the end of the Sahara Desert to the north and the beginning of the rainforest to the south, separated by a region known as the Sahel. Finally, we reach Southern Africa, whose boundaries are somewhat vague but include South Africa, obviously, Lesotho, Eswatini, Botswana, and Namibia, and possibly also Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Malawi. These nations are all part of the South African Development Community, alongside Dr. Congo, Tanzania, Comoros, Mauritius, and Seychelles. The first 5 nations, however, are also part of the South African Customs Union, and they all have very diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds in their own right. Bantu languages are again widespread throughout this region, but Khoisan languages are also widespread throughout the Kalahari Desert, though it should be noted that the Khoisan language family is actually an outdated theory, and nowadays actually refers to multiple different language families. Nonetheless, these groups, including mainly the Khoikhoi and the San, speak languages such as Zulu, Sandawe, Hadza, and Xhosa. And yes, Xhosa, as these are in fact the famous clicking languages of Southern Africa, more or less the only of their kind in the world. So this was kind of a very brief basic overview of how diverse Africa really is. So I guess I just took 7 minutes to say that basically saying Africa is all the same would be like saying Europe is all the same, but like times 3. Remember, South Africa alone has 11 official languages, as well as numerous others that are spoken but not official. And even that only makes up a small fraction of the 2,000 languages spoken across the continent. Of course, there's really no true way to measure diversity, and the only reason I stuck so closely to linguistics is because I honestly personally find languages to be easier to keep track of and to neatly categorize for a short educational YouTube video. But do keep in mind that, art and religion are also things. Also, I intentionally left out European influences in sub-Saharan Africa since I wanted to talk about the native cultures. But do keep in mind that whichever empire a given country was once under has likely played a large role in everything from cuisine to governmental structure to which language you should probably learn if you want to travel there. Basically, Africa is crazy diverse, and lumping it all together as one homogeneous landmass isn't really a good way to think about the place. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like.
All right, so hopefully some of the things you might have seen, remember when we did the life of a t-shirt and we talked about in Kenya, hopefully you maybe that might have clicked in your head when you saw some of the clothing that they were wearing. When we're talking about change over time, we're talking about how the cultures in these areas have changed over time. Some things have stayed the same, like some of the languages that we're talking about in sub-Saharan Africa. And then other languages have been added, especially when we're talking about the colonization of Africa, okay? So hopefully everybody has their course arc and their journal open and ready to go. So the objectives are to explain or examine how the culture of Africa has changed over time and identify ways in which the past of Africa continues to affect it today. And most definitely, we can see that when we go from the scramble for Africa, all the European powers carving it up, to a lot of the issues that they've been dealing with in Africa today, okay? So let's go to our introduction. So it says, before exploration and colonization, Africa was generally divided into tribes. These tribes numbered in the thousands, and each had its own language and culture. Some of these tribes date back thousands of years. As time has gone on, the ruling of Africa by tribes has morphed into ruling by nations. As we've already seen in previous modules, this has caused some clashes. So I know we talked about this briefly in the past, where we've talked about in Africa, and when the European countries kind of carved up and made these countries in Africa, they shoved a whole bunch of tribes together that had traditionally been enemies. And it caused some clashes, but ultimately it was kind of like, we're going to work together to get rid of these European invaders, right? We don't like each other, but we'll work together. Like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we're going to work together. And once the European countries left Africa, that led, now they no longer have a common enemy to fight, and the clashes came back tenfold, okay? So let's look at our vocabulary. All right, so autonomous. Can anybody tell me what they think autonomous means? What do you guys think autonomous means? And you can unmute or you can type it in the chat, whichever one.
I feel like sort of independent.
There
That's
you
what I've
go.
heard. Like it's independent, like working on yourself.
Yeah, independent, and you're in charge of making your choices. So when we're talking about autonomous in a country-wise, it says once the colony had proven itself to make choices, it was considered autonomous. Autonomous is kind of the idea of self-ruling. Does that make sense? Does that work for you guys? Self-ruling would be a good way to think of autonomous.
Yes.
Okay. Tribalism. Think not so much independent, but think more self-ruling, Taj. Okay. Tribalism. So it says Europe took over Africa with no regard to the tribalism that had taken root throughout. So tribalism, if you think about it in governing terms, the people were grouped into tribes, right? So you have your head of your tribe. Some of the tribes have councils. However, the tribes govern themselves. And so all of those tribes throughout Africa governed them their own tribes. How they dealt with other tribes was based off of traditions, etc. But how they handled it, when I talked about the carving of Africa, is Europeans came in and were like, oh, I want all of this area. So what if there are 30 tribes in there and half of them hate each other? I'm taking this area and I'm smushing you all together. And that's what they mean. Landlocked. What does landlocked mean? I mean, I'm asking you to think back geography-wise here. What does landlocked mean? Anybody tell me? Even if you just land and lock.
What
So
my guess would be you're locked on land.
so you don't have water around you. You're surrounded by land, not water. No, not that you're not allowed to leave the land. It is a country that is surrounded by other countries that doesn't have access to water. Why would that be a big deal? Think about the continent we're talking about.
Well, in Africa, there's a whole bunch of dry spots. That would be a really big concern.
Because of, what do you need?
Well,
you need water
water to survive. And considering that they're landlocked, they have other countries around them that also don't have water. They don't have a near water supply. That would not be very fun. Just not having any water.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the crops die and everybody die of thirst?
So, I mean, here's the problem. So you have some countries that have money. We see this in the Middle East, where it's desert region, and they just have oceans or seas around them, but they have money from oil, so they have been able to make desalinization, right? They can take the salt out of the water. But if you're a landlocked country, and what we've talked about, especially in Africa, most of the countries in Africa are not fully developed countries. They are developing. They don't have a lot of money. Their GDP is small. They're poor. They're poor countries. So if you don't have access to water and you don't have the money to be able to make water from like seawater, salt water, etc., yeah, it's a big issue. You can't grow your crops, you can't drink, which then means what do the people have to do? They migrate, right? That would be a push factor. If there is no water, no availability of fresh water, that would be something that would push them out and going into neighboring countries. And again, remember, there's a lot of tension amongst these countries because of the tribes who've been shoved together and all of the issues taking place. Okay. A coup. Does anybody know what a coup is? And yes, that's how you pronounce it. C-O-U-P, a coup. Exactly. So generally when we talk about coups, we talk about military coups. So it is a seize of power. Most of the time, the militaries do seize power. We see a lot of coups taking place throughout Africa because, and juntas are generally military. A coup is a seize of power where one group takes over another one. Yes. So if you think about it, right, what does that do for a country? If you're constantly having coups and leaders are being replaced, etc., what do you think that does for the country or countries in the case of many of them in Africa? What do you think it does for them? Well, you may not care who is the leader. Well, you kind of have to pay attention who is the leader because you don't want to get on the bad side. Is your country stable? if this is constantly taking place? It's not, right? So then that causes a lot of problems as well. A nation state, if you guys remember in the very beginning, I told you guys, like, when we're going to talk about countries, we can call them countries, we can call them nations, we can call them nation states. In this case, when we're talking about Africa, and it says a nation state could be created by a population breaking away from another one. Think Eritrea. That is a small nation that broke away from Somalia and created its own country. That's probably the easiest one to think of when we're talking about nation states. But a nation state, it's one of those political words. Nation, nation state, government, or nation, nation state, country, or state. We could even use the term state. Okay. All right, so we've done those words. Let's do our matching in our course arc. So the behavior and attitudes that stem from strong loyalty to one's own tribe. Okay, Anais is tribalism. She got that one quickly in there. And then a sovereign state whose citizens or subjects are relatively homogenous in factors such as language or common, nation state. Good. And guys, it doesn't necessarily have to be homogenous in language or common descent. It could be, but not. It doesn't have to be. Okay. A sudden, violent, illegal seizure of power, definitely a coup. Especially of a country almost entirely surrounded by land, landlocked, good. And then, of course, it just leaves us autonomous for our last word. All right, does everybody have this done? Give me a thumbs up emoji if you've got this completed. Okay. All right, I'm seeing a whole bunch of thumbs up. Yay. All right, so we're going to move on to our next page in our course arc. All right, so the concept is talking about tribal Africa. So we've looked at ancient civilizations that sprung up in Africa thousands of years ago. Remember, we were talking about trade and talking about the different empires. And then remember, we talked about the trade that involved no language, the languageless trade, right? It could be like smoke signals, leaving things, etc. So we have talked about some of those ancient civilizations. We're also going to talk about the fact that the first humans are traced back to the African region. And in fact, if you look in this region right in here in the Great Rift Valley, that is actually known as the cradle of mankind. Okay. So you can say that Africa has experienced a lot of changes over time. The beginnings of Africa and many other regions have their roots in tribalism. This is when the people have a sense of belonging based on their tribe and culture beliefs versus loyalty to a nation. For many years, Africa was divided by tribe, not by borders. Borders would be drawn by Europeans with no regard to ethnic groups, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, so you can see in this map here, these are all these different former empires, tribes that came out of those regions. And you'll notice in some of these areas, some of these are literally nations, but you see a bunch of groups together in those areas that would be shoved together as nations with the when they carved out Africa. Any questions on this map? Anything that you noticed or anything you wanted to point out? No? Okay. So we're good to move on to our next page. All right, so we're going to talk about Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is a prime example of change over time in Africa. Once upon a time, it was an empire. Then it became a communist state, finally a republic. Over many years, there have been migrations and conflicts to lead to what we know as Ethiopia today. And historically speaking, it has never been colonized. which we will learn next is a very big rarity, especially on the continent of Africa. It is believed that Ethiopia has been inhabited since 2000 BCE, that's before Common Era. For many years, the kingdom would be ruled by the Solomonid dynasty. Ethiopia was founded by the son of the Hebrew king Solomon. He became known as Menelik I. By the 1600s, this dynasty would change. The Oromo would push their way in. In doing so, they would bring their own religion and customs. This would also be Ethiopia's first major exposure to Western and Islamic culture. And then let me go to, I'm going to read the next two paragraphs and then we're going to click on that link. Ethiopia would experience large changes in the mid-1800s. Tewodos II, with the support of the church, came to power. He set out to modernize Ethiopia. This meant that centralizing the government, establishing roads, strengthening the military. His reforms were not always popular, and upon his death in 1868, this would lead to the eventual rule of Menelik II, who would be celebrated for beating Italy. Italy would strike again in the 1930s, so pre-World War II. By this time, Haile Selassie I, or they were led by Haile Selassie, I think I'm saying that right, the first, they would be captured in 1936. By 1941, Ethiopian and British forces would push Italy out of Ethiopia. Selassie would govern until 1974 when he was pushed out in a coup. They would be run by communists until the early 1990s. Now think about this. After World War II, remember, China becomes communist and Russia becomes the Soviet Union. So communists in the Eastern Hemisphere was a very, very big push. We would have Western democracies in the United States pushing for democracy. And of course, you would have countries like China and the Soviet Union pushing for communism. So communism is going to look really good to a lot of different countries in the Eastern Hemisphere. Okay. Until the 1990s, when the Soviet Union falls in 1989, and we start seeing communism kind of, not that there aren't communist nations, there are, but communism as a, was no longer the only option that people saw, or the abuses from what took place under the Soviet regime and communism kind of made communism look bad, okay? Although during that time, led by Miriam, Ethiopia would be torn apart by guerrilla warfare. Eventually, it would lead to a democratic government. So let me click on this site. Remember, anytime you see blue in our course art, it's a link for us to go to places. So in this site, it talks about, you have Ethiopia's Saints for the Gates Diary, cultural close-up, talking about the Ark of the Covenant because of when the Coptic Christianity was there. Different wonders were in that area. So we can click on these links. So you can see all of these spots right here. And if you notice, like when I run over it, you know, like here's the pyramids of Giza or the city of Aksum. This one is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the city of Gondar, the monastery. Anywhere in here, you can click on these little diamonds and it'll take you to all of these areas. And you can look at Black Kingdoms of the Nile. That's where the Nile is located. The Swahili Coast. Talking about slave kingdoms. The Holy Land. The road to Timbuktu, that really is a city. And then lost cities of the South. So I would say, I want to give you guys, how about like 5 minutes? I want you to click on that link, and I want you guys to go to the Wonders or go to either Wonders or Cultural Close-Up. And I want you to find one cool thing on this site. I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to find one really cool thing that you're going to share here in just a moment. Okay? So you can either go to the cultural close-up or you can click on the wonders, whichever one. Okay? Does everybody understand what we're doing? Okay. Yeah, just one cool thing. I know you can find a ton of them, but I want you to just find one thing, one cool thing. Got about 3 more minutes. Okay, 2 more minutes. One more minute. All right, guys. What one cool thing did you find? And you can, the diary on which page?
As one dam. I don't know how to actually say the name correctly.
Okay, so you said the diary on the wonders page?
Yeah. Gates diary. No, up. Wait, what?
I said go to the wonders or the cultural close-up.
Oops.
Empires of Mali and Ghana, Taj. Okay, what was cool about those? And Samuel, can you expand on what you were saying, what you mean by that? The land of gold. Okay, absolutely. Remember when we were talking about the trading, right? Gold for salt. Yeah. Samuel, what was one thing that was interesting to you? Anybody else? Anything about any of the kingdoms or the Holy Land? Yeah, the temples of Abu Simbel for Nefertari. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, those temples are absolutely beautiful. Anybody else? Anything else stand out to you? Something you thought was really cool, really neat? Okay, Drew. Where are you at, my king? What are you talking about? Can you point me in the direction that you're talking about? Because obviously we're not talking about pop stars. This is past history that we're looking at. So what can you point me in what you're speaking of? So the Black Kingdoms of the Nile? Is that the one you're talking about? Or are you on cultural close-up? Okay, so let me go to cultural close-up. So are you talking about the Mendi or a traditional Nubian wedding? Because that's like oh, you're talking about the road to Timbuktu. Okay. So yeah, they're talking about a caste within the Mandi society. Good. So, and the big thing about the griots is they're the ones who are responsible for keeping the oral tradition, which means they actually start as children learning the songs and the stories and the history, and they memorize. They have to memorize everything because it's not stuff that's being written down. It's the telling of it through an oral tradition. What a lot of places have been doing for a lot of these groups is videotaping, recording them, singing the songs, talking about the oral history. We're just talking about what's on your screen right now, Adriel. they've been recording them, because practicing those oral traditions has, you know, it's very far in between that is done. So now a lot of they're recording a lot of them so that they don't lose a lot of those stories, because with them being an oral tradition, it means it's not written down. It's what has been passed from one person down to the next, all told verbally. Cool. Anybody else have anything cool that they saw? Anything on the cultural close-up or in the wonders? So hopefully what you guys got is the fact that a lot of the culture has not been completely lost. They've been working very hard to preserve some of those past histories, those past cultures, even through everything that they've gone through with the carving up of Africa. I think before we leave for today, this last one right here talks about the 11th century churches. This is actually a church, and if you were to look down from the top, this actually looks like a cross. It's set in a mountainous region of Ethiopia. There are sanctuaries carved from stone, and they remain a place of pilgrimage for Ethiopian Christians today. So you can see them going to the church there. All right, so historians believe that Ethiopia has been populated since, can you guys tell me? (2000 BCE), good. Ethiopia has never been colonized? True. Very good. All right. All right, so we have 1 minute left in class, guys. So tomorrow, sorry, tomorrow we are going to finish up the Module 8, Lesson 3, Course Arc and Journal. Yes, it means before Common Era. Yeah. So yeah, we're going to finish up our journal and our course arc tomorrow. And that is it. We are done for the day. Bye, everybody. Bye, guys. This doesn't need to be up here. Yes, Ryan?
So we're doing the journal tomorrow.
We're going to, yeah, because there's only 2 questions in this journal. And we didn't get to those pages yet.
All right.
Okay.
All right. I'll bookmark it.
Awesome. Good idea.
Bye.
Bye.